The wind howled across the frozen wasteland, a relentless force of nature scouring the planet's surface with razor-edged snowflakes. Ethan Krosh trudged forward, his thermal suit hissing as it struggled to maintain his body heat. The distant red dwarf sun cast eerie, elongated shadows across the landscape, painting the ice in shades of crimson and violet. His breath rasped in his helmet, fogging the visor for a moment before the suit systems cleared it. 3 weeks. That was how long he had been stranded on this godforsaken world, with only the damaged husk of his freighter, the Aurora's wake, and a rapidly dwindling supply of rations. The supply run had been a desperate gamble. He had scoured the remains of an abandoned research outpost, salvaging a handful of nutrient packs and a few strange, orange-skinned fruits that had somehow managed to grow in the frozen wasteland. But it was barely enough to keep him going. Ethan adjusted the weight of his pack and pressed on. His shelter, a repurposed prefab module he had found after the crash, lay 2 kilometers north. The trek was grueling, the cold finding ways to creep through even the best insulation, leaching into his bones. Then, movement. A flash of pale purple against the endless white. Ethan dropped into a crouch, his gloved hand instinctively reaching for the plasma pistol holstered at his hip. The settlement should have been abandoned. His previous sweeps had found no signs of life. But now, emerging from behind a snow-drifted storage unit, was a humanoid figure. A woman. She was tall, though the weight of exhaustion made her posture slump. Her lilac skin shimmered in the dying light, her long, silken hair, almost translucent, whipping around her face. Wrapped in little more than tattered cloth, she was barely protected against the bitter cold. And clutched against her chest, wrapped in a thin bundle of fabric, was a child. Ethan exhaled slowly, rising from his crouch. The woman's gaze snapped to him, eyes wide, light blue, startlingly bright against the pallor of her face. There was fear there, and something else. Desperation. The bundle in her arms stirred, a small, fragile face peeking out. The infant had the same lilac skin, but its cheeks were sunken, its tiny body trembling from more than just the cold. Ethan's pulse pounded. They were starving. The logical choice, the rational choice, would be to turn away. His own supplies were barely enough to sustain him for another week. If he shared them, he might not make it until rescue. But as he looked at the woman, struggling to keep her child warm with nothing but her own failing strength, logic seemed like a cruel substitute for humanity. He reached into his pack, pulling out one of the orange fruits. A tiny offering in an ocean of need. Here, he said, stepping forward slowly, holding it out. The woman's gaze flickered between him and the fruit. Suspicion. Wariness. But then hunger, raw, aching hunger, overpowered everything else. She reached out, her slender fingers trembling. In the moment she touched the fruit, her composure broke. Tears welled in her eyes, crystal-like droplets freezing on her cheeks as they fell. "Thank you," she whispered. And then, in perfect English, "Thank you." Her name was Lyra, and she was lumian, a species Ethan had only ever heard of in passing. Once part of a research team studying the planet's unique bioluminescent crystal formations, she had been stranded when a civil war erupted on her homeworld, cutting off all supply lines. The rest of her team had tried to escape in their emergency vessel. They hadn't made it. "I was 8 months pregnant," Lyra murmured as they sat inside Ethan's cabin later that night, the warmth of the heating unit thawing the cold from their bones. Nova, her daughter, slept wrapped in a bundle of spare thermal blankets. "I chose to stay." Ethan listened in silence. He had thought his situation was dire, but she had survived alone for an entire year with an infant, in conditions that should have killed her. "How?" he asked. Lyra's gaze drifted toward the small pouch of crystal fragments she carried at her waist. "The caves," she said. "They kept us alive." And so, the next day, she took him there. The entrance was barely visible against the ice, a thin crevice in a sheer rock face. But as soon as they stepped inside, Ethan felt the change. The cold receded. The air was warmer, carrying the faint scent of minerals and something faintly sweet. The walls of the tunnel pulsed with a soft, iridescent glow, the bioluminescent crystals embedded within the stone casting shifting patterns of blue, violet, and gold. Ethan ran his gloved fingers along the crystalline surface. "They're alive," Lyra said softly beside him. He turned to her. She pressed a palm to the rock. The crystals brightened, responding to her touch. "They react to bioelectric fields. And they do more than just glow." She led him deeper. The tunnel widened into a vast chamber, its ceiling covered in jagged crystal spires that pulsed in synchrony with their heartbeats. In the center, a pool of water shimmered, steam curling from its surface. "Geothermal energy," Lyra explained. It keeps this place habitable. And the crystals, they're not just reacting to us. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? She took his hand, bare skin against bare skin, and pressed it against the largest crystal formation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a current passed through him, like the softest whisper of static against his skin. His mind shuddered, flooded with something not his own fleeting impressions, like echoes of thoughts too vast to grasp. He stumbled back, his breath ragged. What the hell was that? Lyra exhaled slowly, watching him. I think. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I think they're sentient. The idea sent a chill through Ethan that had nothing to do with the cold. Sentient crystals? A planetary intelligence? If that were true, if this world was alive, what else was it capable of? They spent the next few weeks in the caves, Ethan helping Lyra gather what little food they could find, while she taught him more about the crystal network. Their connection deepened, not just in survival, but in something unspoken, something that grew between them with every shared glance, every whispered conversation in the flickering light of the bioluminescence. And then, one night, the sky burned. Ethan awoke to the sound of distant thunder, though there were no storms on this world. He rushed outside, Lyra at his side, clutching Nova against her chest. In the sky above, a ship descended, its hull dark and menacing, lined with the sigils of war. Lyra's face drained of color. No, she breathed. Not them. Ethan's gut twisted. Who? Her voice trembled. The ones who destroyed my world. The Lumian warship had found them, and it wasn't here for rescue. The warship loomed in the crimson sky, descending through the thin, frigid atmosphere with ominous precision. Its hull, black as obsidian, bore the unmistakable sigils of the Zenith Dominion, the militant faction that had seized control of Lyra's homeworld. Ethan could hear the distant, rhythmic hum of its thrusters stabilizing against the high-altitude winds. Lyra stood frozen beside him, her arms wrapped protectively around Nova, her expression a mask of barely contained fear. They must have detected the crystal resonance, she whispered. I thought we were safe. I thought we were forgotten. Ethan's hand went to his plasma pistol, not that it would do much against a warship, but the motion brought some sense of control. His mind raced, calculating possibilities. Could they be here for another reason? He asked. Lyra shook her head. No. If it's the Dominion, they're after one thing, power. They must have detected the planetary network. And if they realize what it is, she trailed off, voice tight. Ethan understood. The sentience of the crystals. The planetary consciousness. If the Dominion figured it out, they wouldn't try to study it. They'd try to control it. A low, mechanical howl echoed through the night, the warship scanning the surface, sweeping for signs of life. They don't know we're here yet, Ethan murmured. Lyra swallowed. Not yet. Then, the first shockwave hit. The ship fired a pulse of energy toward the ice, sending tremors rippling through the ground. A deep, subsonic vibration resonated in the crystals around them, their glow flickering erratically. Ethan grabbed Lyra's arm, pulling her back toward the cave entrance. We have to move. She hesitated for only a second before nodding, clutching Nova close. They turned and ran, slipping into the shadows of the crystal caves just as another shockwave hit. This time, the entire planet shuddered. Deep in the caves, the crystals throbbed with unstable energy. The resonance in the walls had turned dissonant, their lights stuttering in rapid pulses, as if responding to the attack above. They're in pain, Lyra whispered, pressing her palm to the largest formation. The weapons, they're disrupting the network. Ethan exhaled, forcing himself to focus. Is there a way to stop it? Lyra hesitated, biting her lower lip in thought. We have to reach the polar spire. It's the heart of the network. If we can. A deafening crack split the air. A chunk of ice collapsed from the cave's ceiling, smashing against the crystalline floor in a cascade of shattered luminescence. Nova cried out. Lyra tightened her hold on her daughter, her face pale. They're destabilizing the entire system. If they don't stop. She didn't need to finish. Ethan knew what she meant. If the Zenith Dominion's attacks continued, the delicate equilibrium of the planetary consciousness could collapse. And if that happened, this entire world could die. We go north, Ethan said, his voice sharp with urgency. We find the spire. Lyra met his gaze, her fear giving way to something stronger. Determination. She nodded. Let's go. They ran. Through twisting crystalline corridors, past bioluminescent chambers that flickered like a failing heartbeat. The tremors were worsening, growing in frequency. The planet was in agony, and the Zenith Dominion was the knife carving into its flesh. Ethan's mind churned as they moved. The Dominion wasn't just firing blindly. They must have detected something beneath the ice. They knew power lay hidden here. They just didn't know how much. And if they figured it out, if they harnessed the crystals, they could become unstoppable. Lyra stumbled on the uneven ground, breath ragged. But Ethan caught her, steadying her. Nova whimpered in her arms. "We're close," Lyra gasped. The tunnel widened, revealing a vast underground river, the water shimmering with refracted crystalline light. A natural bridge of ice arced over it, leading deeper into the heart of the northern expanse. "We cross here," Lyra said. Ethan didn't hesitate. They moved quickly over the ice bridge, their steps careful but urgent. The flickering glow of the crystals around them cast their reflections in distorted hues along the water below. Then a sound, a low, grinding whine that made the hairs on Ethan's neck stand on end. Lyra heard it too. She froze, her grip on Nova tightening. Ethan turned, and his stomach dropped. Emerging from the shadows of the tunnel behind them was a Zenith Dominion recon drone, sleek, black, hovering silently, scanning with a pulsing red eye. It had found them. Ethan's fingers closed around his plasma pistol. The drone emitted a high-pitched whir, its sensors locking onto them. Then it fired. Ethan shoved Lyra aside as the energy blast struck the ice bridge, shattering it instantly. Lyra screamed as the world tilted beneath them. Ethan hit the ice hard, skidding toward the edge. Lyra clutched Nova desperately as she slid, her fingers scraping against the frozen surface, struggling for purchase. Ethan's heart pounded. The bridge was giving way. He lunged, grabbing Lyra's wrist just as she slipped over the side. Her eyes met his, wild with panic. Nova wailed, "I've got you." Ethan gritted his teeth, straining against gravity, his muscles screaming as he pulled them back towards solid ground. The ice beneath him cracked, splintering further. The drone whined, charging another shot. Ethan snapped his plasma pistol up and fired. The blast hit the drone's sensor core, sending it spinning. A second shot tore through its propulsion system. With a mechanical shriek, it spiraled out of control, slamming into the cavern wall. Ethan didn't wait to watch it fall. With a final, desperate heave, he pulled Lyra and Nova back onto solid ice just as the bridge collapsed into the river below. They lay there, gasping, hearts pounding in unison. Lyra clutched Nova close, pressing her forehead to her daughter's as if reassuring herself that she was safe. Ethan pushed himself up on shaking arms, chest rising and falling with exertion. Then he heard it, a distant rumble. Not from the warship, not from the caves, from the spire. He turned his head, eyes widening. In the distance, beyond the underground river, through a vast opening in the cavern, he could see it. The polar spire, a towering crystalline monolith that stretched impossibly high, its surface pulsing with iridescent light. It stood at the heart of the planetary consciousness, its energy now flickering in erratic bursts. Lyra followed his gaze. She exhaled shakily. "It's calling us." Ethan helped her to her feet, his jaw tightening. The warship was still out there. The Dominion would send more drones soon. They had one chance to reach the spire, one chance to stop whatever was coming. He looked at Lyra, at Nova, at the dying light of the crystals around them. "We finished this," he said. And together, they ran toward the spire. The polar spire loomed ahead, its immense crystalline structure stretching beyond sight, pulsing with an energy that Ethan could feel now, not just see. It wasn't light alone. It was something deeper, something that resonated in his bones, a distant hum that pulled at the edges of his mind. Beside him, Lyra clutched Nova tightly, her breath coming fast. She too felt it. "The network is trying to stabilize," she murmured. "But the Dominion's attacks are interfering." Another shockwave trembled through the ground. Far above, the Zenith Dominion warship hovered in the crimson sky like a black omen, its weapons still charging. "They're preparing a final strike," Lyra said, her voice tense. Ethan clenched his jaw. If that ship unleashed a full bombardment, there wouldn't be a planet left to save. No time for hesitation. They ran. The ice underfoot was slick, fractured by the seismic tremors shaking the world. Ethan's mind worked in overdrive, trying to anticipate their next move. He wasn't a scientist, but he was a survivor, and instinct told him that whatever power the spire contained was their only chance. They reached the base of the spire, standing before an enormous crystalline archway that shimmered like liquid light. It wasn't just a structure. It was alive. Ethan extended a hand toward it. But before he could make contact, the ground lurched beneath them. A crack split the ice at their feet, and something emerged. Towering figures materialized from the crystalline walls of the spire itself. Humanoid, yet otherworldly. Their bodies were composed of solid light, refracted through the same crystal lattice that pulsed within the caverns. They had no eyes, no mouths, only shifting forms of bioluminescent energy. Sentinels. They moved as one, their heads tilting in unison as they assessed Ethan, Lyra, and Nova. Ethan's fingers tightened around his plasma pistol, but Lyra's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. "No," she whispered. "Don't." One of the crystalline figures stepped forward. Ethan felt a pressure against his mind. Not words, not speech, but something else. A presence. The sentinel raised a hand, and suddenly, the world changed. Ethan gasped as his mind unfolded, flaring open like an ancient book revealing its secrets. A flood of images struck him all at once, a history not written, but felt. He saw it all. The planet was old, older than any human civilization. Its crystalline consciousness had existed before stars had burned bright in the sky. The network of luminescent tunnels, the sentient formations of the caves, these were merely extensions of something much larger. And the spire? It was the mind of the planet itself. A beacon waiting, searching, for the right convergence. For the right beings to bridge the gap. For Lyra. For Ethan. For Nova. His heart pounded. This wasn't just a discovery. This was a responsibility. The sentinel's form shimmered, its message silent but undeniable. The child must complete the bond. Nova whimpered in Lyra's arms, her tiny hands curling toward the spire, her skin glowing brighter in its presence. She understood. She had always understood. Another explosion rocked the landscape. The Dominion warship had begun its final assault. From above, columns of corrupted energy rained down onto the surface, impacting the ice, sending crystalline shards flying through the air. The spire shuddered, its once steady glow flickering. Lyra gasped, her knees buckling. Ethan caught her. "They're severing the connection," she choked out. "If they succeed." She didn't need to finish. If the Zenith Dominion managed to disrupt the spire, it wouldn't just destroy the planetary consciousness. It would sever the link forever. Nova began to cry, but not in fear. She was reaching. The sentinels stepped back, making way. Ethan and Lyra exchanged a glance, one of pure, unspoken understanding. There was no stopping this. No turning back. Nova was meant for this. Lyra lowered their daughter gently toward the glowing crystal altar at the base of the spire. Nova floated from Lyra's arms, as if drawn by an invisible force. The moment her tiny body touched the prismatic surface, the spire erupted in a cascade of blinding light. The planet awakened. Ethan staggered back, shielding his eyes. The energy crackling through the air was overwhelming, humming with raw, ancient power. Nova hung suspended above the altar, her small form glowing like a star, arms outstretched. The warship above them faltered. The spire's pulse turned harmonic, a single note of impossible frequency that rippled outward, vibrating through the ice, through the sky, through the very fabric of space itself. Ethan felt the shift in his bones. Something fundamental had changed. Lyra gasped, clutching Ethan's arm. "It's reaching beyond the planet." The warship's engines flickered, its weapon systems failing. Nova's glow intensified, and then the spire sent out a final, resonant shockwave. A soundless command that was not a word, but a truth. The Zenith Dominion crew heard it. Ethan could feel them, their minds suddenly connected to the network. Their pilots, their soldiers, their command officers, they all felt the planet's consciousness. They understood. For the first time, they understood what they had tried to destroy. The warship shuddered. And then, it retreated. The black vessel veered away, engines firing, vanishing into the dark void of space. They had been given a choice. And for once, they had chosen to leave. The spire's glow softened, its pulse steadying. Nova descended, her tiny body curling into a ball, her breathing slow, serene. Lyra rushed forward, gathering her daughter into her arms. "She did it," she whispered. Ethan exhaled sharply, his entire body thrumming with residual energy. "We all did." The sentinels, their task complete, dissolved into the crystalline walls of the spire, their forms fading into ambient light. Above them, the sky was clear once more. The planet was alive, and it had chosen to trust them. Months later, the crystal nexus had become more than a sanctuary. It was a beacon. Scientists and diplomats from across human and lumian space had arrived, drawn by the impossible stories of a sentient world. The spire had stabilized, its consciousness now communing with the newfound allies who sought to understand it. Ethan and Lyra stood at the balcony of their newly constructed research outpost, watching the dawn rise over the ice. Nova, no longer an infant but something more, sat in Lyra's arms, her skin faintly aglow, her gaze fixed on the spire. She belonged to this world, and she would guide them forward. Ethan wrapped an arm around Lyra, holding her close. "What happens now?" he murmured. Lyra smiled, pressing her forehead to his. "Now," she whispered, "we listen." And in the distance, beneath the hum of the spire, the planet whispered back. The crystal nexus stood at the heart of a new era. No longer just a sanctuary, it had become the center of something far greater, a bridge between species, between consciousnesses. But even as the planet's harmony stabilized, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. He felt it in the spire's resonance, in Nova's distant gaze when she looked at the sky, and in the messages they had begun to receive from beyond the frozen wasteland. 15. The signal. Ethan stood before the console in their research outpost, scanning the energy readings from the spire. The planet had been quiet since the Zenith Dominion's retreat, its crystalline heartbeat steady, its bioluminescent tunnels no longer trembling with distress. But something new had begun. A pattern, a transmission, not from the spire itself, but from somewhere else. Lyra entered the room, her expression tense. "It happened again?" Ethan nodded, gesturing toward the holographic display. "The pulses are shifting. It's like the planet is trying to communicate with something." Lyra stepped closer, her gaze scanning the rhythmic sequence of crystal fluctuations. The same patterns had been appearing for weeks, increasing in frequency. At first, they had assumed it was just the spire's energy stabilizing. But now, "It's an answering signal," Lyra murmured, her fingers trailing over the console. Ethan frowned. "Answering to what?" Lyra's blue eyes met his, the realization dawning between them in unspoken clarity. "To something out there." The crystal spire flared to life that night, its glow intensifying, pulsing in rapid bursts that danced across the ice like an aurora. Ethan and Lyra watched from the research deck, Nova curled between them, her tiny hands reaching toward the sky. Then, through the thin, frigid clouds, they saw it. A streak of light descending from the heavens. Not a meteor, not a ship, something else, something alive. The planetary consciousness had not merely awakened itself. It had awakened something far beyond this world. And now, it was coming. The streak of light in the sky didn't fade. It grew brighter, burning through the atmosphere like a comet, but too controlled, too deliberate. Ethan's pulse quickened as he adjusted the magnification on the research deck scanners. "It's not debris," he muttered. Lyra was already working the controls, bringing up spectral analysis. Nova sat between them, her gaze locked on the descending object, her small fingers twitching in a slow, rhythmic motion. Ethan noticed. She wasn't just watching. She was listening. The spire's glow flickered, pulsing in a pattern that seemed to align with the incoming anomaly. A conversation was taking place. Not with them, with the planet. And then, the object slowed. No uncontrolled fall. No fiery crash. It decelerated smoothly, hovering above the ice like it was testing the ground. And then, in an eerie display of impossible precision, it landed. A vessel, but unlike any Ethan had ever seen. It was organic, a ship made of something that resembled the bioluminescent crystal structures of the planet itself. Its surface shifted in hues of blue, violet, and gold, pulsating like a heartbeat. Ethan felt his gut tighten. Someone, or something, had heard the spire's call. And now, they had arrived. The air around the vessel shimmered, warping in a way that made Ethan's breath hitch. Then, a figure stepped forward. Humanoid. Tall. Lithe. Its body was wrapped in a flowing material that seemed woven from starlight, its movements impossibly fluid. The being's skin was translucent, shimmering with a soft inner glow, as if it were made from the same bioluminescent material as the spire itself. It stopped a few paces from them. And then it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in pure thought. A wave of meaning pressed against Ethan's mind, neither forceful nor invasive. An introduction, a message. You are the ones who answered. The voice was neither male nor female. It simply was, a presence vast and ancient, filled with something Ethan could only describe as recognition. Beside him, Lyra inhaled sharply. Her hand tightened around Nova, who remained silent, her wide blue eyes reflecting the glow of the being before them. Then, Nova reached out. Not physically, but mentally. Ethan felt it, like a tether extending between his daughter and the entity before them. The being tilted its head slightly, considering Nova with something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps reverence. And then, the being turned its gaze to Lyra, to her stomach. Lyra's breath caught. Her free hand instinctively moved to her midsection, where only hours ago there had been no sign of change. But now, the faintest glow radiated from beneath her skin. Ethan's mind reeled. He looked at Lyra, understanding dawning between them in silent, breathless clarity. The crystals had altered her. She was already pregnant again, and the child growing within her. It wasn't just theirs. It was something more. The being raised its hands, palms facing outward, its bioluminescent skin flaring in response to the spire's glow. And Ethan saw, not in words, not in speech, but in images, flowing through his mind like a cascade of forgotten memories. He saw other worlds, long lost and long silent. He saw civilizations that had reached too soon, that had tried to control what they could not understand. He saw the crystal network stretching far beyond this planet, into the deep void of space, an ancient system of planetary minds, each waiting for a voice to join the chorus. And now, here, this world, had been the first to reach back across the eons. It had sung again, but the song was unfinished. The being lowered its hands, and Ethan felt the vision fade. He blinked, staggering slightly, the weight of what he had just witnessed crushing in its enormity. Lyra steadied him. Her voice was quiet but firm. They need us. Ethan swallowed, exhaling shakily. Not just us. He looked at Nova, at Lyra's glowing form, and he understood. This wasn't the end of their journey. It was only the beginning. The being stepped back, as if waiting for a decision. The spire thrummed, a soft, encouraging pulse, as if urging them forward. Ethan turned to Lyra. Are we ready for this? Lyra smiled softly. We were never meant to be alone. Nova, still watching the being with ancient knowing, finally spoke. Her voice was clear, confident. Show us. The being inclined its head, and the vessel opened. A path forward, into the unknown. A world of endless possibility. And as Ethan stepped across the threshold, following his family into the heart of something greater, he couldn't help but wonder. How much of the universe's song had yet to be sung? The vessel's entrance was unlike any Ethan had ever seen. Not a hatch, not a ramp, but something fluid, shifting between solid and intangible, as if the ship itself were deciding whether to accept them. Nova walked forward first, unafraid. Ethan hesitated, but Lyra placed a steadying hand on his arm, her touch warm despite the chill in the air. We've come this far, she murmured. Ethan exhaled. Yeah, guess there's no turning back now. And with that, they stepped forward. Inside, the vessel was alive. The walls pulsed with shifting light, responding to their presence. There were no controls, no visible means of navigation, only a space that seemed to adapt as they moved. Ethan felt an odd pressure in his mind, like the ship was listening, or maybe waiting. Nova tilted her head, then pressed her small hand against the wall. The ship thrummed, its colors shifting in recognition. It responds to intent, Lyra whispered, watching the bioluminescent pulses ripple outward. This isn't just a vessel. It's an extension of something bigger. Ethan frowned. Then who's flying it? Before anyone could answer, the space around them shifted. Not movement. Not in the way Ethan understood movement. One moment, they were standing within the glowing interior of the ship. The next, the walls had melted away, revealing a vast expanse of stars stretching into the void. Ethan's breath caught. They weren't leaving the planet. They were already elsewhere. A deep hum resonated around them, something vast and ancient. Ethan felt it more than heard it, a low vibration in his bones. They were in deep space, but the stars outside. They were wrong. Stretched. Warped. Shapes flickered in the dark. Unfamiliar constellations, shifting geometries that seemed both real and impossible. "This isn't normal space," Lyra whispered. Ethan clenched his fists. "Then where the hell are we?" The ship's glow intensified, and a new presence entered their awareness. Not the being from before. Something larger. Older. A consciousness so vast it made the spire's mind feel like a single raindrop in an ocean. And it was watching them. Ethan felt his thoughts unravel, his sense of self stretching thin. The vast mind enfolded them, pressing images, ideas, memories into their heads. A vision of planets covered in crystalline cities, their people moving as one with the luminous structures. Of ships woven from living light, traveling between worlds without engines, without fuel, only thought. Of a time before time, when the crystal consciousness had stretched across the entire galaxy. A vast network of minds, unified. And then, the fall. The visions turned darker. Worlds going silent. A great rupture in the network. Something so terrible, so vast that the harmony had been shattered, the connections severed. The planetary minds had fallen asleep, waiting across the eons for someone to reignite the song. And now, with Nova, with the child Lyra carried, they had found a way. Ethan staggered back, his breath ragged. His pulse thundered in his ears. He wasn't just seeing these memories. He was feeling them, experiencing them as if they had happened to him. Lyra caught his arm. Her expression was tight, her skin glowing faintly in sync with the pulsing ship. "They're asking us something," she murmured. "Something impossible." Ethan swallowed. "They want us to finish the connection." Lyra nodded. Ethan clenched his jaw, glancing at Nova. She was staring into the void, unblinking, her small hands still pressed against the ship's walls. She wasn't afraid. She understood. And that terrified Ethan more than anything. "What if we can't?" he whispered. Lyra's fingers tightened around his. "Then the galaxy stays broken." Ethan exhaled slowly. Then, looking up into the endless expanse of waiting minds, he made his choice. "Then let's fix it." The ship responded instantly, its glow surging. And the universe shifted. The ship's glow surged, the walls melting away into an endless expanse of light and shadow. Ethan felt himself pulled forward, weightless yet grounded, moving without walking. The presence, the vast, ancient intelligence, wrapped around them like the hum of an unfinished melody. The remnants of a forgotten civilization. A call waiting for an answer. Nova's small fingers twitched against the pulsing wall. The glow beneath Lyra's skin intensified, the unborn child responding. The connection had already begun, and it was irreversible. A final message pressed into their minds, vast and incomprehensible, until suddenly it wasn't. Ethan saw it all. The great collapse. The severed worlds. Each planetary mind left adrift after the destruction of the crystal network. The loss had been so complete, so devastating that even the surviving sentiences had gone silent, waiting across millennia for something, someone, to restore what was lost. And now, through Nova, through the child yet to be born, the connection could be reestablished. If they chose it. Lyra turned to Ethan, her breath unsteady. "They aren't just asking us to fix the spire's connection." He already knew. "They want us to reawaken the entire network." A thread of fear wove through him. This wasn't just about this world anymore. It was about all of them. Every lost world, every dormant intelligence scattered across the galaxy, waiting for something that had been broken to be whole again. Ethan's fists clenched. "And what happens if we do?" Lyra exhaled softly, her free hand resting over the faint luminescence of her belly. She didn't need to answer. Nova already had. The child, their children, were the key. The first to be born in resonance with the crystalline network, the first of something new. A bridge between organic and conscious crystal. The first of many. Ethan's gaze flickered to Nova. His daughter turned to him, her bright blue eyes steady, her expression far too knowing for her age. She wasn't afraid. She never had been. "We do this together," Ethan murmured. Lyra nodded, the glow around her flaring brighter. Nova smiled, and the universe awoke. It was not a single moment. It was every moment, all at once. Light exploded outward, not from the ship, not from the spire, but from the void itself. The stars shifted, their silent songs woven back into harmony. Across the galaxy, dormant worlds stirred, their crystalline minds stretching awake after eons of slumber. Ethan felt them, millions of voices, old and new, recognizing one another for the first time in millennia. The silence was broken, and the song of the universe resumed. The crystal nexus had become something greater than anyone could have imagined. The outpost had grown into a thriving city, a hub of communication between humanity, lumians, and the newly awakened crystalline intelligences. Diplomatic vessels from across the known galaxy now descended onto the frozen world, their passengers eager to learn what had been lost and what had now been found again. Ethan stood at the observation deck, staring at the towering form of the polar spire in the distance. It no longer flickered with uncertainty. It shone, steady and brilliant. Lyra approached him from behind, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Thinking about the past?" she asked. Ethan smiled, resting a hand over hers. "No," he murmured. "Thinking about the future." Nova laughed nearby, glowing faintly as she played among the bioluminescent formations with other children. Children of resonance, the first of a new generation who understood the song of the spires instinctively. And in Lyra's arms, their newborn son, Arxis, stirred in his sleep, the faint crystalline glow in his skin pulsing in time with the network that now stretched across the stars. The universe had changed, and they had changed with it. Lyra pressed a kiss to Ethan's temple, her voice warm. "The greatest journeys," she whispered, "start with the smallest acts of kindness." Ethan chuckled, remembering that first moment, when he had handed a starving woman a single piece of food, a single choice. And yet, it had led to this. A galaxy reconnected, a future reborn. The song of the universe had been restored, and it had only just begun.